Kairete Pantes, Haute estin Catamaran. This is Catamaran, Hekene Diatheke, and here we have our fourth lecture on John's Gospel, moving on to chapter 2, Kephalion to Deuteron. Katoioanen Kephalion to Deuteron, John chapter 2, apo tu protu stiku geos tu gendekatu, from verse 1 to verse 11. Kai te hemere te trite, gamos egeneto in Cana tes Galileas, kai en hemeter tu Jesu eki. Eklethe de kai ho Jesus, kai hoi mathetai autu iston gamon. Kai te hemera te trite, and the day the third, gamos, a wedding, egeneto, occurred. And so the fronting of the temporal phrase here tells us it's locating the event in time, particularly in sequence with chapter 1, where we have this day and the following day, and now the third day. John is setting a narrative temporal frame in the first couple of chapters, which goes on in the next section as well. And then we have the noun gamos, a wedding, egeneto, occurred, that's the thing that happened. And then we're given a place. In Cana tes Galileas. In Cana, Cana should be understood as dotike, dative, even though it is not declined. Tes Galileas, of Galilee. That is, it's locating Cana in Galilee. And so it's a some people would say a partitive genitive, possibly a locative genitive, a genitive of place. Kai en, and there was. And so again, this is typical to use en to frame and introduce a character onto the scene. Kai en hemeter tu Jesu, and the mother of Jesus was eki there, that is, at the wedding. This sets up the scene. Eklethede, the de is marking a progression, a temporal and a narrative progression. Eklethede, and was called ke ho Jesus ke hoi mathetai, or ho mathete. I think you should take or understood this first ke or kai as adverbial, and Jesus was also called. Kai hoi mathetai autu, and his disciples. And so that helps smooth out a couple of things. It's not both Jesus and his disciples. That seems an unlikely way to read this kai combination. It places the focus on Jesus, which partially explains why this is a singular verb. Though the other way to understand this is that this is a compound subject, and often in a compound subject, if one of the parties, particularly the first party, is singular, the verb will remain singular. So a couple of different ways to construe the grammar. The meaning is essentially the same, though. Kai ho Jesus, but I think adverbial is best because it fits with the fact that Jesus' mother is there. Jesus also was called, and his disciples, iston gamon. They were called to the wedding. Kai hustere santos oinu legi hemetur tu Jesu pros auton, oinon uke husin. Kai legi autei ho Jesus, tie moi kai soi gunai, upo heki hehoramu. So it begins here with a genike opolutos, a genitive absolute. That is marked by the presence of a noun, oinu, and a participle, hustera santos, in the genike, the genitive. Here, oinu, oinos, the wine, hustere santos, it's aioristos, has run out, it failed, it lacks. That's what hustereo means, to fail, to lack. And so here it's come to fail. That is, it's reached the point where they've run out of wine. That's the background information. That's why it's fronted in the clause. Legi hemetur tu Jesu. Here's the actual thing that's happening. The mother of Jesus says, pros auton, to him, oinon uke husin. They do not have wine. Again, the oinon is fronted. It's the focus. We're not told who doesn't have wine. In fact, it's irrelevant information. It's the wedding people don't have wine. All the way through here, we have legi in present tense. Some people call this a historic present, a narrative present. I don't think you need to read too much into the choice there. There's certainly different theories about how historical presents work, but it's just carried all the way through this episode. Legi aute ho Jesus, Here's another thing we can observe. There is a fairly balanced distribution in New Testament Greek between pros auton, with speech, to speak pros to somebody, and the use of the dative. Legi aute, Jesus says to her. Not a great deal of difference in my opinion. Ti e moi kai soi. First thing Jesus says is an idiom. Some people will say this is a Hebraic or a Semitic idiom. There does seem to be that kind of construction. However, there are examples in extra-biblical Greek of the same thing, and so it's not necessary to say that that's the explanation. It's a perfectly reasonable Greek phrase by itself. Essentially, it means, what is there in common, moi, to me, kai soi, and to you? So these two dotike, these two datives, working in terms of reference, what is in common to you and to me? What is there between us, or what is shared? What does this matter have to do with me and with you? It can be very distancing, and I think that seems to be what's going on here. The second thing that suggests that is the use of the vocative, the kletike, gunai. Jesus refers to his mother as gunai. If you read some commentaries, you'll see it's very difficult to translate this in English in a way that brings out the force of the Greek without overplaying it. Mother in English tends to be too distancing and perhaps too dismissive. But the fact that it's not the usual term of address we might expect Jesus to refer to Mary, his mother, it's not Meter and it's not Miriam or Mariam, that does suggest that it's thematically important and it's part of the distancing that's going on here. Jesus gives an explanation, upo heki hehoramu. Upo, combination of u and po, not yet. Heki used to mean has come. This tends to be taken as a verb that is perfect in meaning, but present in form. That's the usual kind of way of understanding that. That's not terrible. Hehoramu. The last thing to say on this particular slide, hora is an important term within John's Gospel. Its meaning is partly defined by the way John uses it. The second thing to say is it's very natural to jump from hora to hour in English. That is a unit of time. But the term in Greek is broader than 60 minutes. Firstly, in terms of temporal, the understanding of time and how time works, but also just in terms of the word itself. The season, the time, in some contexts, hora can be very similar to kairos. And so, my time has not yet come, my hour has not yet come. Those are all fine translations, but understand that hora is not necessarily bound by our English usage. Legi hemeter autu tois diakonois, hotian legei humin poiesate. Esande ki litanai hudriai hex, kathodon katharismon ton judaion kemenai, korusai ana metretas duo e treis. So again, the action is carried on here with these present verbs of speech, legi. Now, hemeter autu, the mother of Jesus, says, again, dotike, tois diakonos, to the ministers, to the servants, to the attendants. Diakonos are not necessarily slaves, so it's not tois doulos. They're those responsible for serving and attending at the wedding. Then we're given her speech, hotian legei, humin. Hoti is broken up in most texts to help you distinguish it from hoti as one word. Technically, there's no real difference. In fact, hoti as one word comes from the same structure as hoti. But what thing, whatever thing, and then the an adds more indefiniteness. Hotian, whatever such thing, and that's the an is triggering or bringing about the hypotaktike, the subjunctive. Whatever such thing he should say. Whatever on earth Jesus says, whatever comes out of his mouth, whatever that could possibly be, that's what the hoti an is bringing out, that indefiniteness. Humin, to you. Poiesate. Here we have a prostaktike imperative. It's aoristos because it's seen as a holistic action. Carry it through. Do what he says. It's not seen as an ongoing open-ended action. And what defines the action is whatever he says. Esande. The de is providing a bit of contrast there. It's shifting our focus, and so is the air sign as well. There were there εκεί lithenai hudriai hex. The things that is there are the hudriai, the water containers, water jugs, water jars. We're told two things about them. First, lithinai, they are stone. Here is an adjective describing the material they're made of, lithinai, from lithos. And there are 6 of them, hex. I wouldn't read too much in the fact that the material is fronted, the number follows. You've got to put these adjectives somewhere. Kataton katharismon, we're told why they exist or what they're there for. They are there according to, that is, in relation to, ton katharismon, the cleansing, ton Judaion, of the Jews. This should be understood as a kind of an explanatory note, according to the cleansing habit of the Jews, the cleansing custom. Then we get to kimenai. There's a couple of ways to understand kimenai here. Firstly, we can construe it as forming a periphrastic verb. That is, you have the imperfect air sign with a perfect participle, well, not a perfect participle, but kimenai as a present participle, but functioning equivalent to the passive. People know I don't like the word passive, but here it works. The passive of tithemi. Greek speakers do not normally use a passive for tithemi, to have been placed. They use kimenai or kemai, to lie. So they had been placed there. That's one way to understand this. They were there. Kimenai just telling you they're lying there. They're situated there. They're placed there. Korusai is a second participle. Korusai from the verb koreo. Koreo, when it doesn't have a preposition, still has the sense it deals with space. And so it either means crossing space or containing space. And that's what it means here. Containing anametretas. Ana, this is particularly, I don't know if it's, I wouldn't say it's restricted to biblical Greek, but you certainly find it quite often, for example, in the Septuagint. It is distributive. Anametretas duo o tres. So each of them containing 2 or 3 metretas. This is a measurement term. Gallons and gallons. I forget off the top of my head how many gallons, but it's a lot. And here we're given an approximation. Anyway, duo e tris. Legi autois ho Jesus, gemisate tas hudrias hudatos, kai gemisan autas geos anno, kai legi autois, antlesate nun kai ferete to architriclino, hoide enenkan. So continuing again with present tense, ho estos chronos, for the verbs of speech. But you notice that the other verbs are not in the present tense because it's a story in the past. Jesus says to them, that is tois diakonos, gemisate tas hudrias hudatos. Fill, so gemizdo means to fill. The thing you fill is in the aitiatike, accusative. The thing you are filling the container with goes into the genike, hudatos, of water. Fill them full of water. The expression in English, full of, helps you understand that the genike is used for the thing, the liquid or whatever that is doing the filling. There are other words for fill that you might have encountered, but gemizdo is one, gemisate. Kai egemisan autas, and so they filled them. So now we have them carrying out the actions just as Jesus' mother told them to, told in fairly straightforward terms. Airistos autas tutestin tas hudrias. Heos, until, up to where? Anno. In this kind of construction, anno means up to the top, that is to the brim, to the above point. Kai legi autois, and he says to them, so Jesus carrying on his instructions, antlesate nun. This first verb, antleo, means to draw a liquid from a container, including a well. If you read Don Carson's commentary on John, I think Don makes a exegetical fallacy, and that is he follows Westcott, who argues that antleo means always to draw water from a well, and so the argument is, having filled up the water jars, Jesus commands them to go and draw fresh water from a fresh water source and take that water to the architriklinos. That is, in my opinion, an exegetical fallacy that's over drawing upon the evidence for antleo to come to a somewhat ridiculous conclusion. in the context, where are they drawing the water from? It makes most sense that they're drawing the water from Tas Hudrias. And it's odd to conjecture that they have to draw it from somewhere else because the verb can only mean drawing water from a well. That's not what the verb means. And there is counter evidence out there in Greek literature that points against Carson's reading. So anthesete nun now draw kai ferete to architrikino. Another interesting thing is ferete, all except one uses the imperative of phero in the New Testament are present tense, enestos chronos. Even when aspectually you might expect the aoristos. And the fact that they carry out the action with the aoristos, enenkan is the aoristos of phero, and they brought it, that suggests that phero, ferete, in the imperative, in the prostaktike alone, is not holding all its aspectual difference. That is, when you see fere, ferete, you can't assume that it's holding an aspectual difference because there's not that contrast within the New Testament texts. Ferete to architriclino. The architriclino is the person who is archi, in charge, the archon of the triclinium, the three couches. Not here in a technical sense, but in a broader sense, the person in charge of all the servants who are managing the feast for the gamos. Hoste egeosato ho architriklinos to hudor oinon gegenemenon, kai uk eidei pothen estin, hoi de diakonoi eideisan hoi antlekotes to hudor, phoni ton numphion ho architriklinos. Few difficult words to say in here. Gegenemenon particularly doesn't roll off the tongue at the first time. But let's go back to the start of the verse. Hos when, de, contrast, narrative development. But when, egeosato, giomai, to taste. So here, aoristos, holistic, complete action in the past. When the head of the servants, when the chief of the servants at the feast, tasted to hudor, the water, then we get this predicate structure. The water, gegenemenon, this is from ginomai, it's parakimenos, perfect. The water having become oinon, wine. And so I think the best way to understand this is, or you can understand it as oinon gegenemenon, but this is telling you what's happened to the udor, and this is telling you what is the thing that it has become, and that's why it doesn't have an article. You don't need an article, and you don't want an article in a predicate construction like this. Kai uk eide, and he did not know. Eide is the past of oida, to know. Oida, grammatically, morphologically, is perfect and yet present in meaning, and then its pluperfect form, hyperxentelikos, is used for the imperfect, but even really kind of for the aorist. So that's why I just say past here. He did not know. He was not knowing. That's overinterpretation or over-translation in English. He didn't know, pothenestin, from whence it came, from whence it is, where it comes from. Hoi de diakonoi. So here, this there, I think this is not development, but just contrast. But the servants, the ministers, the attendants, edeisan, they knew. Which ones? So this second hoi is helping define the diakonoi. Hoi entlekotes, those, and then we have a participle entlekotes. It's parakimenos, perfect. How do we know that? This is what looks like reduplication, but it can't be an augment because it's not an indicative verb. And then the kappa is helping me know, this is an energetike, an active, perfect participle. The ones that had drawn tohudor, the water, they knew. Of course they knew. They're the ones who knew where it came from. But this is interrupting hoatriklinos, phoni. And so that's why he's restated here. Phoni, he calls, who calls? Phoni ton nymphion ho architrikinos. Right, he calls the groom, the bridegroom. Who calls the bridegroom? The chief of the servants at the feast. Again, that's too wordy to translate. You shouldn't translate like that, but just to bring out what does the architriklinos do, that's who he is. Kai legi auto, pas anthropos proton ton kalonoinon tithesin, kai hotan methustosin ton elasso, suteterekas ton kalonoinon heos arti. Carrying on with our present verbs of speech, legi auto, he says to him, and this is almost proverbial. I don't think it is a proverb. I think it's just has the structure or the language of a kind of proverbial statement. Pas anthropos, every person, everybody. Proton, adverbial, epirematos. Firstly, ton kalon oinon tithesin, places, puts out, ton kalon oinon, the good wine. This is a kind of a generic here, the good wine, a category of wine. Kai hotan, and when, the an makes it whenever, so an indefinite relative of time, and whenever, methustosin. So it looks like methuo, but it's actually methusko. Methusko in a perfect structure, methustosin. It's not really passive. That's the wrong understanding, right? Because it's becoming intoxicated. It's entering the state of intoxication. That is a middle change of state idea. Whenever they become intoxicated, that is the guests, the drinkers, ton elasso, the lesser or the smaller. Elasso is used as a comparative for mikros, but here I think lesser in terms of quality is what's happening. The other thing that's going on is there's a bit of elision here. That is the lesser what? Oinon, ton elasso oinon, understood wine. What do they do with it? Tithesin, right? They set out the lesser wine when the guests become drunk. This kind of elision is very natural in Greek. You don't need to supply things that are clear, particularly in a proverbial type statement. Su teterekas, almost want to put in a de here for contrast, but su is emphatic. You, teterekas, have kept. Here we have a parakimenos, a perfect tense, reduplication and kappa. You have kept, ton kalon oinon, the good wine, heos arti. Before we had heos ano for filling the jars up to the brim. Heos arti, up till now, just recently. Arti is very often used for the very recent past, in the sense of now as well, right? This present time or up to the present moment. Tauften epoiesan arken ton semeon ho Jesus in Canates Galileas, kai ephanerosen tendoxan autu, kai episteusan is auton hoi mathetai autu. Tauftan and arken are in a object-complement relationship. And so the way to understand this is, understand the first phrase first. Tauften epoiesen. He did this which is, or this that is, more naturally in English. He did this as, right? He did this thing, and for what's this thing? It's the episode we've just read about. It's verses 1 to 10. It's the turning the water into wine. He did this as arken, the beginning, ton semeon, of his signs. Bit of debate about how to understand the article here, because this is the first time we've referred to ta semea, the signs within John's Gospel. But it is a term that's going to become very important within John's Gospel. So a couple of options. Firstly, it can't be referring back to anything because we haven't introduced it before. Secondly, it could be understood as a possessive type. That is, when you want to indicate possession in Greek, sometimes you just use the article, ton semen, of his signs, perfectly reasonable. Thirdly, we could understand it as referring to something that already understood by the readers or listeners. And one of the ways this sometimes works in the Gospels is that the Gospels have assumed knowledge. And so the author could be assuming that you know something about the signs he's going to talk about throughout the Gospel, and so he feels free to refer to it as ton semeon, even at the first instance. I'm not sure I'd place any bets on these options. I don't think there's a huge amount of difference, especially as you keep reading. It becomes clear again how freighted, how important this term ta semea, the signs, speaking about Jesus' miraculous activities, is within John's Gospel. Ho Jesus, so Jesus did this as the beginning of his signs in Cana tes Galileas, right? It's relocating us in Cana tes Galileas. This is important partly for the narrative structure of chapters 2 to 4, and the placing of Jesus in Cana to begin with as the main early focus of his ministry. Kai ephanerosen aoristos, aorist, phanero, to make known, to make clear, to make phaneros, plain. So he made plain ten doxan auto. He made plain his glory. Again, doxa is a very, I was about to say weighty, and that's kind of a pun. It's a very freighted term in John's Gospel, has a lot of significance that comes out as you read on in the Gospel. Kai epistivsan is auton hoimathetai auto, and his disciples, his students, they believed in him. Again, pistou can have a couple of ways to construct the object of belief. John, more than anyone, I think, has a tendency, I won't say prefers, has a tendency to use an ace structure. The second thing to say is, what does it mean within John's Gospel to believe in Jesus? I think that's a question that, again, only comes out as you read on the Gospel and you see several instances of belief and what that means and what it does not yet mean. I don't think the fullness of belief of pistis is clear within John's Gospel until you read through the narrative and see the failures to believe, the need for greater belief, and where belief ends up on the other side of the death and resurrection. Kai tuto est in totelos. That's the end of this lecture. I'm hoping now that it's the new year, I'm back from some summer vacation to be offering some more of these videos in sequence and to get through the whole of John's Gospel in 2026. Theu vulomenu.